When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about how did Ned find out that Lyanna was at the Tower of Joy, and who may have actually told him this information. Now, I have a list of characters it could possibly be, but I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts as we get into the video. So right away, let's go with a timeline of events, just to refresh people on what happens at the end of Robert's Rebellion, leading Ned to the Tower of Joy. So Ned Stark, after the Battle of the Trident, he is the person now in charge and leading the forces to King's Landing to take it over. Because Robert sustained an injury in his battle with Rhaegar, Ned is now in charge. We know that the Lannisters end up getting to King's Landing before Ned Stark does, and we see everything that happens there. Jaime kills Aerys, Robert ascends the throne, all that kind of stuff. But after this moment, Ned then leads his forces to then relieve the siege at Storm's End, where Stannis has been during the whole war. Ned does that and then takes a small group of men and goes directly to the Tower of Joy. So the real question that we have to answer right off the bat is, well, did Ned know of the Tower of Joy before relieving the siege at Storm's End, or after? Because that's a really big factor to all of this. We know that Ned and Robert do not end on good terms, and when Ned comes back, the two kind of reconcile over their love of Lyanna after she dies, and that's kind of what repairs that relationship, but not fully. Some of their issues still prop up, as we see later on in the story. So the real question that we have to answer is, when did Ned get the news of where Lyanna was? I personally think that it happened at court, at King's Landing, because even if you want to suggest, well, Lyanna's at the Tower of Joy, Ned would go straight there. If you do think about it, just where Storm's End is really on the way to getting to the Tower of Joy, so it makes sense that Ned would go south and have a reason. Like, his cover reason would be, well, I want to go south because I've got to relieve this siege at Storm's End, but then I'm also going to do a couple things here and there and go to Dorne, go to Starfall, all that kind of stuff. So there is reasons there for Ned to like cover up why he's going south. And just on the face value of it, I don't think anybody would have been telling Ned, for instance, that Lyanna is dying or any of these things. I think that any information that I think Ned would have gotten would have just basically been, well, Rhaegar took Lyanna to the Tower of Joy, and that maybe that they were in love and it wasn't a kidnapping. That's what I think possibly could have been sent. So I have 6 main candidates of who I think could have told Ned this information. Now, the first person being Ashara Dayne. Ashara, it would make a lot of sense, just given Ashara would have known about what was happening at the Tower of Joy. Remember, her brother, the person she's closest with, is at the Tower of Joy protecting Lyanna. So it could make sense, especially with Ned and Ashara maybe having a past in terms of maybe like a crush or a relationship. They at least knew of each other. So it makes sense for Ashara to tell Ned. She could have sent this with a bird, or she could have even sent someone to find Ned. If Ned is at court, at King's Landing, somebody that Ashara knew could have told him this information. Maybe Ashara sends a rider while he's there at Storm's End. That's what gets him to go south. Maybe when he's taking Storm's End, somebody gets to Ned and tells him this is what happened. That's very possible. A lot of it makes sense for why Ashara would tell Ned this, because the war is over, and maybe hoping that Ned, because of his love for her, or his feelings towards Ashara that they might have had, Ned would make sure that Arthur didn't die, or try to explain why he was there. That doesn't end up going out well. Arthur Dayne dies, all that kind of stuff. Or I guess allegedly, because we don't know 100% if that's the case. A lot of people believe that Arthur Dayne is still alive, but it makes sense if Ashara was the person to tell Ned. It is not the one that I personally believe, but I could definitely see it being the case, given Ashara Dayne's proximity. She was very close to Elia. She would have had a lot of information that she could have passed on to Ned. Number 2 is Varys. So Varys is another person that has all of this different information. He's somebody that is very interesting to me because I think he was playing both sides. When he realized that Aerys's kind of fall was inevitable, I think that he started kind of playing both sides. Now, Varys was loyal up to Aerys to the very end. He told Aerys not to open the gates, but even Varys knew the war was coming to a close. Whether they opened their gates to the Lannisters or not, the city was going to fall, and the Battle of the Trident was really the defining battle, and it's the reason the Lannisters go on Robert's side. So yes, on one side of it, Varys does seem to be loyal to Aerys even up to his final moments, but at the same time, there's a lot here that's really interesting about some of the things going on during Robert's Rebellion. We know that Robert gets some sort of information about the armies that are rallying against him, and that's what prompts him to win all those different battles where everybody was trying to meet at Summerhall. Robert took down all those armies. He got some information that was going to happen, and it's never said who the source was. I personally believe it's Varys. It makes a lot of sense in my opinion. Let Varys put his hands in both sides. We know that Varys is a Targaryen or maybe even a Blackfyre loyalist, but I think he can kind of see the writing on the wall. The one issue I think that comes out of Varys telling Ned is, for one, why would Varys keep this a secret for so long? Like, he seems to not really care about the Jon thing going forward, even though Jon might be the legit heir. Even if Aegon is Aegon, Jon would still be an interesting part of the Targaryen dynasty that you would want to look after. Varys doesn't seem to do that in the story, and so I've kind of, my first interpretation of this was that it was Varys who did it. But now that I look at it, I think that Varys and his actions afterwards don't necessarily line up with him telling Ned and him knowing about Lyanna being at the Tower of Joy. I don't know if it adds up, because I think Varys himself would want to know more about that, and that doesn't ever seem to come up in the story. So, for one, I don't think that's the case. I do want to point out, though, there is a point in the war, before the Battle of the Trident, Geralt Hightower is sent to go retrieve Rhaegar, and he seems to know where Rhaegar is. He's able to get him back in a pretty quick amount of time. So that would either imply that the Kingsguard already knew where Rhaegar was, or someone at court knew enough to tell Geralt where to go. So in my opinion, I think people at court would have known where Rhaegar was, or at least some small group of people, maybe even Barristan could have known this. So that kind of leads into my next person. Barristan and Selmy, along with Jaime, are the only two Kingsguard to actually live through the events of Robert's Rebellion. Could it be that Barristan tells Ned, after Robert has pardoned Barristan, all that kind of stuff, that Barristan told Ned where the Tower of Joy was and all that kind of stuff? I don't think this one is true, just based upon the fact that if there was a living Targaryen heir, I don't think that Barristan would have informed on Rhaegar and Lyanna's whereabouts, all that kind of stuff. Now, the other part of this is, we don't know if the person that tells Ned knows that Lyanna is actually pregnant, or what Rhaegar is trying to do with Lyanna at the Tower of Joy. So it's hard to interpret those things. And so when you start adding in characters that don't necessarily know about Lyanna and Rhaegar, like Varys and like Barristan, it gets really hard to pinpoint what information they would have known. Like, these are all plausible. All of these are plausible if they could have told Ned, but at the same time, their actions afterward don't seem to indicate that they knew. And so that, in my opinion, kind of crosses Barristan out as well. The next person is kind of a wild card because they're a very minor character, but when we look at Brandon, when he goes to King's Landing, and then he ends up getting killed alongside of his father, the only person to survive that is Ethan Glover. That was Brandon's squire. Ethan Glover then is one of the people that goes to the Tower of Joy with Ned later and dies there. So why is it that Ethan Glover escaped and is also in the party with Ned? Could Ethan Glover have known where the Tower of Joy was? It's possible, based upon, gossip he might have been hearing at King's Landing, all that kind of stuff. But again, I point to the idea that there's not a lot of evidence here. And Ethan Glover dies directly after this, so we don't have him as a source to try and figure out what he knew. He's just a wild card. He's just a character that survived long enough and was at court. He was at all the places that maybe he was relevant to Ned finding out about the Tower of Joy. For me, though, the last two that I have for you guys are the most likely in my opinion. The first one is Howland Reed. So Howland Reed, to me, makes a lot of sense given how close he is to Ned, given how Ned values Howland Reed so much, but we're also told that Howland Reed is somebody that studied magic and things like that, if you want to go off of the Night of the Laughing Tree story that Mira and Jojen tell Bran, and that actually being Howland Reed in the story. Howland Reed and the Reeds as a whole and the Crannogmen are linked to the old gods quite heavily. So could Howland have seen a dream maybe of the Tower of Joy and of Lyanna dying there, that he told that to Ned, and that's what prompted them and a small group of men to then go to the Tower of Joy? It would make a lot of sense because Ned shouldn't have really known what to expect at the Tower of Joy. But it seems like he kind of understood that. Like, taking a small group of men seems to implicate you didn't want a lot of men to see what was going to happen here, but he takes just enough to do that, especially when you think about the idea that he's finding Arthur Dayne there, one of the greatest swordsmen of all time. He only takes a couple men. So I think that this is a very interesting case because Howland Reed then also is the only person that we're told outside of Ned that survives the Tower of Joy, well, alongside of Jon, of course, if that is the case. So I think, in my opinion, Howland Reed makes a lot of sense. It makes sense as to why Howland is so close to Ned after this point. The two have a very close relationship, albeit we don't see Howland Reed. So Howland Reed makes sense from the point of view of the magical side of it. It would make sense given the stories we've heard with Jojen and Mira. It would fit into the story quite nicely. It would also give another reveal that when we see Howland Reed in the Winds of Winter, if we get the book, that will be another reveal. Like, he had a dream similar to Jojen, and that's what led him then to tell Ned about the Tower of Joy. So I think that makes a ton of sense. I very easily could see that being the top option. But the last option for me is the one I find to be the most realistic. So if you go off of the Knight of the Laughing Tree story, in my interpretation of that story, Benjen is the person that gets all of this armor for Lyanna to be the Knight of the Laughing Tree, this mystery knight. Rhaegar then traces that to Benjen, and then Benjen more or less introduces Rhaegar to Lyanna, starting the entire Robert's Rebellion, more or less. It would also go to, if you believe the theory, that Benjen goes to the Wall more because of his actions of R+L not saying anything about it, whether that was voluntarily Benjen going to the Wall or because Ned forces him to go to the Wall. At some point, Benjen finally, his guilt overcame him, and he told Ned what was going on and where Lyanna and Rhaegar was. Now, the biggest issue with this theory is, would Benjen entrust, a letter to Ned? It would have had to have been either a letter or him sending a writer there to tell Ned all of this. But I think, given Benjen where he is as a character, it would make a lot of sense if Benjen was the person that told Ned about the Tower of Joy and told Ned about Rhaegar and Lyanna's relationship and what happened there. It would then make sense that when Ned comes back to Winterfell, even though, again, his only heir is Robb, the Stark family has been decimated by the conflict of the Robert's Rebellion, you would assume Benjen may be needed as well to marry and help strengthen the Stark claim. He's instantly sent to the Wall, or he instantly goes to the Wall. We're not clear on his motivations of going there. It would make a lot of sense if that was Ned who pushed him to go to the Wall because of R+L and all that. It would also make sense as well as to why Benjen tells Maester Luwin that he wants Jon to go to the Wall because of his identity and all of that kind of stuff to try and protect him, because he was very close to Lyanna. So that is what I have for you guys today. Let me know what you guys think. Do you subscribe to one of the people I mentioned in today's video, or do you think it was somebody else that I didn't mention at all? So thank you guys for watching the video, and I will see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.